Perhaps you've heard that we live in a post-truth world. What does that designation even mean? What is post-truth? And for that matter, what is truth? I'm joined today by Dr. Joe Miller, a Christian scholar, who's going to help us address these questions. Joe, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So the first question, Joe, is a simple one. What is truth?
Yeah, it's the question, what Pilate asked Jesus, what is truth, as he's on trial? It's a question for the ages, and we're going to unpack in just a few minutes, right? I think the best definition that I've ever come across is there's a theory of truth that's called the correspondence theory of truth. And all that really means is anything that is true must correspond to reality.
Yeah.
And that's very simple and straightforward. Now, unpacking it can take a lot of time, but the idea that if it's true, it must correspond to something that is real.
Yeah. So now, you hear a lot today about this idea that truth isn't objective, that truth is relative. So,
yeah.
Why would somebody say that?
Yeah, I think that everybody has an aspect or a facet of what constitutes truth in their mind. And the problem is when they take that one little facet and they try to make that the whole spectrum of what truth is. And so for relativists, that little facet usually comes with the phrase like, my truth. Well, this is my truth. Now, when they say that, there's a whole spectrum of things. It's not necessarily wrong, again, depending on how they mean it. But like, for example, I could say my truth is that I love peanut butter. Well, that's true for me. It's not true for you, Fuzz. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make it untrue because you hate peanut butter. Mm-hmm. I could even be allergic to peanut butter, but it still could be my truth that I love it. Right. And so there's no way for you to tell objectively, but it could still be true. Again, though, it still has to correspond to reality, that I'm not deceiving you, right? Yeah. That statement has to correspond to some truth, fact, or value, even in my own mind, right, that I love peanut butter. So that's okay, it's limited, but if that's not the whole of what truth is, and then when we try to make it, that's what relativism is.
Yeah, yeah. So what is then the post-truth view of truth?
Yeah, so, I guess people mean a lot different by that, but I think by post-truth, they really ultimately are driving at the fact that truth is completely relative in some sense. Now, postmodernism adds another facet to that. They'll argue there's a synthetic sort of cultural truth that can happen, which again is a facet of truth that corresponds to reality that has merit to it. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in the 1800s, I could say slavery is legal, mm-hmm, slavery is morally good, and that would have been true in the 1800s. Yeah. Across the globe, really. In some places, it's still true today. But if we could say slavery is illegal now, that would also be truth. But that truth shifts as cultural standards shift, right? But that doesn't make it a non-truth. It just means that it has a synthetic value. It's transient with culture, but it still corresponds to reality. Yeah. So it's still, and I think what most people mean by post-truth is some sort of postmodern concept where it's my truth plus that synthetic truth, but that's for them, the whole scope of it. That's all that truth really is.
Yeah. And then, so how does the post-truth mindset then differ from relativism, or does it even really differ from relativism?
Well, they're very close. I mean, relativism, again, it depends what people mean, but if by post-truth they mean postmodernism, then relativism doesn't really acknowledge even those cultural truths outside of my truth. My truth is really the whole reality. There is no truth outside me. There is no reality outside me. Postmodernism says there is a reality, but it's all social, it's all cultural. So it's still shifting, it's still transient. So in that sense, they're both the same, and that all truth in those two positions are transient truths that change over time and can change at any moment, depending on my feelings or the laws of a culture. So in that way, they're very similar.
So then, what role do feelings play? Because today it seems like so many people connect what they feel about an issue with what they perceive to be true about an issue.
Our feelings, as a Christian, here's what I'd say is I think our feelings can give us a reflection of how God has designed us or made us to be. Now, they can also be deceptive. And the real question is, how do I know the difference? And how can I discern the difference? So, in talking with somebody in an apologetic context, I think it's always important to value people, to validate those feelings, to say, to empathize, to sorrow. If they're grieving, when somebody's grieving the death, they don't need some bumper sticker slogan of truth. Oh, we'll all be with God again someday when we see your mom who's dead now. It's like we don't need to hear that at the moment. Sometimes we just need to see somebody weep with us or sorrow with us. So feelings have value, but ultimately what we want to get those to is, can we connect those feelings to some external reality to make sure those feelings align with truth? And a truth that transcends just the person and even the culture and connects with God. Because if we can connect our feelings to God, then we even have a stronger foundation for living really a holistic life, right?
Yeah. So why does truth matter then?
Well, truth matters, I think, in a very practical way, if I can explain it this way. So we described at least two kinds of sort of transient or eminent truth, right, that shifts. But there's a kind of truth that is above that, a transcendent truth, that it emanates from the very nature and person of God. And so it matters that all of these kinds of truth connect, that we experience on earth, connect to that transcendent truth, because that's the only way to really change and transform society. Because that's the issue today. Everyone sees injustice in the world. They see terrible things happening. And how can I be a difference? Well, the thing is, you can change the laws of a nation, but that doesn't change the values of the individuals. Or it doesn't change the fact that the next election cycle, a new person can come in charge and they can change that law just like that. So then you're left with, what did all that effort do if it didn't change it beyond the cycle of politics or beyond the culture? So if we care about truth, or if we care about culture, then we care that truth does correspond to this transcendent reality of God, because that gives us a stable foundation for knowing when I say it's wrong to kick puppies, I know that's wrong for everybody, not just for me. It's not my truth. It's not just a synthetic truth of culture. It's true in every nation. Let's not kick puppies, right? Yeah. So that's a silly example, but hopefully it makes this point of, if we value something, it has to be tied to something bigger than me. And that's why this idea of truth matters.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe. That's been very helpful.